start by you introducing yourself, and from then on we have a wealth of questions that range from the writing process to the editing process, the revision process, promotion, sales, marketing, all of that stuff. And since you're the expert, we're going to give you center stage, okay?
That sounds perfect, yeah.
All right, go ahead.
All right, well, my name's Stacey, and I'm originally from Calgary, Alberta, and I lived there. I always wanted to be a writer, so the first time I was ever published was in grade 3. I wrote a book review of Pippi Longstocking that was published in the newspaper that I still have somewhere, which is, I was like, this is it, this is my goal. And then I got a poem published in grade 5 in like a student anthology, but by that point I was really struggling with a lot of writer's block. I kept trying to write stories and I would stop about a page in because I couldn't get anywhere with them. So I wrote through high school, but more in class, and well, I'm sure I'll talk about the other stuff a little bit later, I think. But basically I stopped writing after high school and I started working in theater and in museums in Calgary. And then I moved to Ottawa in 2003 and I worked for the Parliament of Canada there. And I ran the tour program, so I did that, and then I ran the educational program there. Then it turned out I really hated working for the government, and I was like, this sucks. So I found a program here in Vancouver that was a master's in children's literature, and I was like, that sounds great, because you get to write and read children's books and talk about children's books. And so I moved to Vancouver in 2010. And for my master's program, for the thesis portion, you could choose. You could write a research paper or you could write a novel. And I wrote a novel, and that novel is the one that you read, The Year in the Life of a Total and Complete Genius. So it's the first novel I've ever written, first ever novel I've ever tried to write, and the first novel that I've ever gotten published. So that's sort of where I started. Now I have another one that's out right now, and the third book in the series, well, a trilogy, I guess. The final book comes out in September this year. So that's a little bit about the quick and dirty version of my life story.
Okay, we're going to open up questions. We got Miss Ennett's class is going to ask first. We're going to go back and forth. So Miss Ennett, then Mr. Badovic, then Miss Ennett, Mr. Badovic, so on and so forth.
So, as a professional writer, has amazing talents when they write, but also have weaknesses. What are yours?
My weaknesses?
Yeah.
So procrastinating is a huge weakness. So I tend to, on my days of writing, when I'm like, okay, I'm going to write, I get up at 7:30, and then I watch TV for a bit, and I write emails, and then I'll go to the gym, and then I'll go for a walk. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I haven't done anything yet, then I'll be like, no, this is ridiculous. It's time to actually sit down and write. And so then I start writing around 3 o'clock or 3:30, and I'll write for another couple of hours after that. So that would be number one. And the second one is that I get stuck a lot. So I've learned how to get past it in different ways of like moving and writing in different sections, and especially with the Arthur books, that format really helped me out as far as finding different ways to keep writing, but not necessarily keep writing in a linear direction. So not always writing the next part of the book, but writing bits and pieces at a time. So, but that would be my two biggest weaknesses, I think.
Thank you.
Okay. There is a question that one of my students has with regards to frustration, and I'm walking around the room trying to find who has it. Who has the question on frustration? Okay, yeah, Justin, come on. Oh.
Yes.
Talking to the mic.
What did you find most difficult while writing this book, and why?
The thing that I found the most difficult was probably getting stuck. So like I said before, I've always sort of suffered with writer's block. Like I think every writer does, but keeping track of all the little threads and pieces in the book and knowing what the next step would be. So I didn't plan out the book ahead of time. I had started writing it, and then I got about halfway through and realized that I didn't know where I was going. And so I had to stop and sort of plan out the rest of the story, and then building in the different sections of, okay, this is going to be an email, and now I'm going to write a newspaper article, but then this part of the story needs to come back in. So dealing with all of those little bits and threads in the story and weaving them together was probably the most frustrating part.
I just want to ask a real quick follow-up question. How have you seen yourself grow as a writer from when you first started with the master's program that you were in to now, to where you're writing a third book? How have you found that that process has grown, and has it gotten easier as you have gone along?
So that's a great question. In that the first book I wrote in about 6 months. It's really based on a true, like a thing that happened to me in my life when I plagiarized somebody else's story and handed it in as my own in grade 9, which I don't recommend doing because then you'll fail, and it's a terrible idea. So that was where I started with the first book, but the second book, I really struggled with what I wanted to write. The third one, again, is really based on something that happened to me in grade 12. And as far as growing as a writer, one of the things that I have learned is how to write around the details that don't matter. So I really like the formats of my books because one thing that I always got stuck on was getting my characters out of bed in the morning and having breakfast and getting them dressed and getting them to school, and then focusing on the interesting parts of the day or the exciting parts that move the story forward. I would get stuck on these benign little details that didn't matter anymore. And by writing in email format, you wouldn't write an email where you told somebody what you had for breakfast. So that was something that I learned how to do and how to build in details through the first 3 books. The book that I'm working on right now is not written in that format. It's written as a straight narrative, and I think I had to write the 3 Arthur books in order to figure out how to actually write a straight narrative book.
But your planning process has improved now. You're actually plotting it out before you put pen to paper?
No, not really. I start the book and I'll write sort of the first quarter of it where I have an idea of where I'm going, and then about a quarter of the way through I stop and think, okay, I've got my setting and I've got my characters and I have a basic idea of the storyline, but now it's time to actually plan out what those next steps are. So I don't plan it out in full or in like minute detail like some writers do, but I do more planning than I did for the first one. Yeah.
Okay, Miss Enid, I apologize for stealing the microphone. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Stacey. You are a very talented author. Do you have any tips or advice to give to a kid that wants to become an author like you?
Give her a sec.
I did when I was in grade 5 and grade 7 and grade 9. I have all of that stuff still with me, and that I don't use it in my stories, but it is really helpful to know what I was thinking about at that time and what interested me. And so I think that's something to hold on to. Like, don't just recycle your short stories or your stuff or throw out your journals, because they're a wealth of information later. Is to not, everybody gets stuck on things, and one of the things that I've realized is that you don't have to write the story from the beginning of the story to the end of the story like in a linear fashion. So if you get stuck but you know where you want to go, put some marker in the middle of your manuscript. I use like 4 X's. I'll just put like XXX, X, and then I'll come back, and it's easy. Then you can search for those 4 X's later and be like, oh, this is a part that I missed, but now I can see what that puzzle piece is because I've got the puzzle pieces around it now. Instead of banging your head against the wall as far as like, I don't know how to get from point A to point C, we'll just skip point B and then come back to it. That would be my 2 pieces of advice that I think are really helpful.
Okay, thank you.
While writing a year in the life of a total and complete genius, what ideas made your final cut and which ones did not? And how do you determine on what makes it in?
So the original thesis version of my book was actually 100 pages longer than the version that you've read. And in deciding what made the cut, I had other people read it more than anything, because I didn't really tell where the things that needed to be cut were. And so I'd say that that's one thing that's so important. It's really hard to share your writing with people, but they have a fresh set of eyes that they can do that for you. So in cutting out, I had my mentor at the time who was working on the book with me. She was like, your plot doubles itself. So it repeated in the middle. It was like he stole Robbie's story once, and then he got caught, and then he stole it again a second time and didn't get caught. And she was like, this is just the same story repeating itself. So finding those things can be really tricky, and once she pointed it out, I was like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. So that, I think, is how, because it's really hard otherwise. I don't know if I would actually be able to look at my book objectively and be like, this doesn't really need to come out. But when I did, like with the second book, I had to get rid of 20,000 words, and they loved the storyline of it, but they were like, but you need to find 20,000 words in there. We're not going to do that for you. So I had to go and shorten the book, and looking at it objectively, anything that didn't move the plot forward in some way got cut. And that is, I think, the biggest thing to look for, is if it's not moving your plot forward or it's not changing your characters in some way, then why is it in your book? You don't need it there.
Sandra, do you have a follow-up question? Because if you don't, I just do.
No, go ahead.
How do you handle the criticism from other people reading your book, and how difficult is it to not take personally?
It's very difficult to not take personally, because it's very personal work, and so it's like the first time I ever got edits, and still even today when I get emails that want to change my book, I like flip out a little bit. I'm like, no, screw you, you guys are wrong. My book is awesome the way it is, and like, no, I'm not changing it. I'm not changing it at all. And then so I read the email and I get really angry about it, and then I shut down my email and I refuse to do any changes, and then 48 hours or 72 hours, I give it 2 or 3 days, and then I go back and I reread the email. And by that point, I've cooled off and realized that they're almost always right and that I am wrong, but that it takes that extra time to reflect on what somebody said and not to take it super personally, because they probably are right. But every time I'm just like, no, that's the stupid. There's a lot of eye rolling, a lot of like me like snickering and being like, whatever, and then I come back to it and they're like, oh yeah, and then I'm humbled by their research and their expertise more than anything.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Bennett.
Okay. Arthur and Robbie have a difficult relationship. Where did the center character of Robbie come from, and why have him in the book?
I guess they do have a difficult relationship, and I think a lot of people read it as Robbie being a bully, because that's how Arthur describes Robbie, is that he's a bully. And I think, for my sense, like there's a lot of stuff that Robbie does to Arthur is bullying, like putting moldy sandwiches in his backpack. That came directly from the girl that bullied me in grade 4, and she used to put moldy sandwiches in my backpack, and then everything I had stunk, and I was like, this sucks. So some of that comes from there, but also I think that Arthur's a bit of a smartass, and I think he doesn't do himself any favors sometimes as far as being a bit of a bully back. So I wanted to capture that relationship between Arthur and Robbie, that we talk about bullying a lot and we hear about it all the time. It's sort of one of those catchwords and themes that comes up a lot. And it's always like, oh, there's a bully. But I think there's a lot more to bullying than actually just one person bullying somebody. There can be a lot of give and take in that relationship. So that was sort of why I had written him in. And then I didn't want it to just stay that way, so that was sort of why Robbie's character starts to shift and they find those commonalities through their relationship and tutoring and the work of Miss Whitehead. So, yeah.
Miss Ennis, do you have a follow-up? Because if you don't, I do.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I don't mean to keep stealing the microphone. It's just there's a lot of intriguing things. You mentioned bullying as kind of something that happened in your life. We couldn't help but notice that while we're reading this that we kind of find Arthur as a little bit of a bully with regards to the way that he writes about Robbie, particularly when he talks about Robbie becoming a cannibal or about him dying. How is Arthur different than Robbie, and how did you try to differentiate the characters from that standpoint, or was it intentional that that Arthur was to be so aggressive in his writing?
I think it was intentional. I wanted, because that was, I think, one of the things that smart kids do. And like my brother is kind of this. My older brother is one of these sneaky bullies, and where he's a smart guy and he's really fast on his feet, and he makes these snide comments about people where they don't necessarily realize that they're being made fun of. And I think there's a lot of people out there like that, and that was one of the things that I wanted to get with Arthur, is that he isn't willing to retaliate with Robbie in a physical sense or even write face to face and confront Robbie about it, but he still wants something to say. He still wants to have his piece and get his digs in too. So that's, I think, why he does it through his writing, because it's a really powerful way. It's the way that he knows how to express himself, whereas Robbie wouldn't. I don't think Robbie would ever think about doing that. That's not how he works. He's a face-to-face kind of guy. Okay.
Is it ours or yours, Miss Ennis?
It's your turn, I believe.
Odisha?
What do you find the hardest part about appealing to your audiences?
That's a great question. I'd say the hardest part is knowing what is cool in some ways, and like, I don't know, I'm not in grade 7 anymore, so knowing what students are talking about and what issues are coming up, I think, is the hardest part, in making sure that it's actually relatable to people's lives. So in dealing with that, one of the things that I did was, like I said, I went back through all of my journals and read what I was thinking about at that time so that I had my own perspective on it. But I also volunteer with a group of students every week, and they're grade 4 to 7, most of them. And so spending time with them and chatting and listening to the issues that they're talking about, what's coming up at their school, what are they dealing with in class and at home. These sorts of things have been really helpful for trying to make sure that my books are relatable, and that I don't want everything to work out always in the end. You know, like Arthur doesn't actually get caught by anyone in an authority figure, right? Like the teachers don't find out that he stole the story, that the people at the magazine don't find out except that he sort of tells them. And I think that was something that I was really aware of, is that there's a lot of stuff that happens that adults don't know about, and and that sort of happened behind the scenes. So I didn't want it to come from above and on high, that it's always adults solving the problem, or that you always get caught, that Arthur had to come, whether his motives for telling the magazine people that Robbie had written the story were honorable or pure is another story. Like, did he do it because he actually felt bad, or did he do it because Kennedy found out? And I think I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's maybe a little bit of both. So that, I think, is part of it.
Excellent.
How did you come up with the format for your books in the form of assignments, emails, and journal entries? What was your reason for this?
So when I first started writing, I went through and I would get stuck on the everyday details of format or of narrative, and all of my straight narrative stories were really boring. And then there's an author who had written a book in verse. It was all written in poems. And she was talking about how much she found that writing in verse was a way to focus only on the important parts of a plot and leave out all of those boring details. And I was like, that sounds really great, but I'm not sure I wanted to write anything in verse. And so the book actually came out of a class assignment in my thesis program, where we had to we had to write a short assignment about an emotion that we felt and sort of add it to a character. And so I thought, well, I wonder if you could actually write a whole book between class assignments and a teacher and a student going back and forth, because it's such a huge part of being in grade 7 is your school life. And so I thought, well, I'll try it out and see if it works. And then writing just in class assignments didn't work, because you don't get a sense of who Arthur is, and there's you're not going to tell your teacher everything, right? So that was how the reading journal came into the story, and it also was starting to feel really boring with just Arthur's voice, and so that's how I started to add the emails into it, was that I wanted to hear from Kennedy and Robbie and get different points of Arthur's, how he writes to Robbie versus how he writes to Kennedy are very different. So that sort of, it started as class assignments, and then I kept adding to that idea until I found the mix that I used.
Awesome.
When you finished your first book, how did you get people to read your book and get it out there for people to talk about?
So I lucked out because of the master's program that I was in. So because I had started my book in a class with a woman who was an author and used to be an editor for a children's book publishing house in Canada, I had asked her to read it and give me feedback on it, and she did that. We went out for lunch, and she was like, what do you want to do with this novel? Like, once your thesis is done, what do you see for it? And I was like, I want it published with Scholastic, because I think Scholastic they seem like a really good publisher. They're a big publisher, which is nice because they have sort of a hold on the school market. And because the book takes place mostly in school, it felt like it was the right connection in there between my book and Scholastic, because there's a lot of different publishers out there. They're all doing different things, and so I did a lot of research into who was publishing books that were similar to mine, and what sort of range did they have, what markets were they looking at, and I thought that Scholastic was the best choice. So she was lovely, and she offered to go forward to the editor, her editor at Scholastic, and offer my book to her. So she did that for me, and she was like, hey, dear Sandy, I've read this book. You might like it. If you're interested, I can get Stacey to send along a portion of it. And as timing had it, and the way that it all worked out, Sandy, who is my editor, wrote back and was like, yeah, send it along. I just finished editing a book about the Holocaust for the last 6 months, so something funny would probably be nice. So I sent it, the first 20 pages to her, and then she asked for the next 20, and then she asked for the whole book, and it just went from there. So I really lucked out, and it was really great of Maggie to put, because she had to put her own reputation on the line for me, which is something that is a difficult thing for people to do, I think. So I kind of owe her everything.
Besides writing, out of all the jobs you did, what's your favorite and why?
Oh, good question. My favorite job of all time was belly dancing. So I used to be a professional belly dancer in university. So I would like teach belly dancing lessons, and I would dance at Greek restaurants and Turkish restaurants, and I made so much money. It was fantastic, and I got to dance, which is a nice way to make some money too. So that was definitely my favorite job. Yep, definitely the favorite.
I saw on your website that you are a teacher as well as an author. How do you manage to juggle writing and teaching?
It works out really well for me because I teach creative writing for students in grade 4 to 7, and it's an after-school program that we do. So I teach for only 6 hours a day, like in the classroom, or it's not a day, a week. So 3-hour classes twice a week, and then the rest of the time is editing their works and planning the classes and creating that. But with that, it sort of allows me the flexibility to write when I have days. So I also work I work at the Vancouver Aquarium part-time. So I spend a day there just chatting with people and doing shows about dolphins and things. And but other than that, I just plan out like Thursday mornings I edit the creative writing, and on Thursday afternoons I work on my own writing, and on Tuesdays I go to the gym in the morning and I write in the afternoon. Wednesdays I write in the afternoon. So it all just sort of works out with the way that the schedule is. But I'm not working, like I don't teach full-time. I don't know how you would be able to work full-time and write. I know a lot of people do it, but I don't have to, and that's nice.
You said Arthur is a mix of your two brothers' personalities. Are there any other characters in A Year in the Life of a Total Genius that are linked to other people in your life?
Yes. So Arthur is, the mix of my two brothers, for sure. Kennedy's writing style, I totally stole from my boss at Parliament, because he was like this 45-year-old guy who wrote with LOLs and exclamation points at the end of every single sentence. I was like, this is the most annoying thing I've ever read. And so that's where I totally took the way that he writes and made it Kennedy's way, because I was like, you write like a grade 7 girl. And so I'm just going to make one. Her character in the first book, not in the second or third book because she changes quite a bit, but in the first book, her relationship with Arthur is based very much on the friendship that I had with my friend Jason in high school, where I was madly, madly in love with him, and he had no idea and had a girlfriend, but he was always really nice to me, and he was an excellent writer and super smart, and so we would hang out, but I was just like, oh, one day, maybe. And it never did come to pass, but we're still really close now. Like, he reads all of my books before anybody else does, and but that relationship and Arthur's sort of obsession with her and thinking she's the greatest thing and really wanting her approval is based on that relationship that I had with Jason back in grade 10.
Does Jason know about your feelings now?
He totally does, yes, and it caused a lot of problems with his girlfriend when she found out. But, they made it through. We've made it through. But, yeah, we talked about it quite a few years ago. where I'd mentioned it to him, and yeah.
Okay. Evan, come on up.
You said on your website that you want to be a famous actor if you weren't an author. If you have the chance, would you use your writing ideas to get into Hollywood?
I wish I could. I have like I've been working on a television script, bits and pieces of a show that I think would be really fun. I don't want to be in it anymore, but it's fun to play around with ideas and see where it might go. As far as, yeah, whether I would actually act in it, I don't think I'm good enough. Like, I'm a pretty mediocre actor, which is why I didn't follow it through.
You have traveled a lot. Is there any place you really want to go, and why? What is your favorite thing to do on a trip?
I would love to go to Iceland. It looks really beautiful and really cool. And I think one of my favorite things, other than like looking around and eating the food and going and seeing what is happening, one of my favorite things to do in other countries is go into grocery stores and see what they sell, because there's so many weird products out there that we can't get. Like, what is this? So it's super geeky, but I like to see what's in the grocery store.
I read somewhere that you always wanted to be a writer, but you only got around to it a few years ago. Why did it take you so long to write your first real book?
I gave up after high school in writing. So I went into theater because I really liked acting, and in university I did theater, and then I got into museum interpretation and talking and that sort of thing, and then I got into Parliament, and it took over my life as far as what I was doing. So it was a real day job and working all the time, and I didn't write very often, but at work, when I worked at Parliament, I used to send these weekly emails that were news articles about things that had happened in our office. So it would be like, boss gets new haircut, and I would write this article about how the boss had gotten a new haircut, or that the pan flute guys, like, you know those pan flute guys on the corners of streets, I don't know, I think they're everywhere, but that they would come back, and it was like the first sign of spring was that the pan flute band was playing outside of our window, or that the bald busker had learned a new song that week, and that it was really exciting. And so I would write these long email articles and send them to everybody that I worked with. And then I realized that that was not what I was supposed to be doing at work. I was supposed to be working and not spending all of my time writing creative writing articles about the day-to-day life of parliamentarians. And so then I started looking into programs where I could focus on writing and actually spend some time seeing if I could be a writer, because I always had wanted to do that. I just kind of didn't do it, and I didn't think I could do it. So then the opportunity arose that I could spend 2 years working on my master's and writing books and see if I could actually make it as a writer. And if I wasn't going to make it, I could find something else and get into writing or get into editing or something like that. But that was sort of why I didn't write for a while.
If I could just ask a real quick follow-up. Writing is a very daunting process, from the actual getting down of the ideas to putting words to keyboard to the editing process to the revision process. How do you not find yourself all consumed by that, and how do you find a balance between writing, editing, revising, and just regular everyday life? How do you not just be so focused on that?
I don't have a brain that focuses on things really like all-encompassing. I really like having a lot of fingers in different pies and having different things going, and I think that the format of the Arthur book really allowed me to not focus on trying to get all the writing done, because if I couldn't write one part, I would write a fun newspaper article, or I would write a short story or a class assignment, and that was like productive procrastination for me. And so now I'm actually writing, like I'm working on 2 novels and then occasionally writing other little things. So I think that just having a lot of different things on the go means that my brain doesn't get super overwhelmed by one specific thing. And then with the editing process, it's really, I find it really exciting, and it's really easy if somebody else tells you, you need to change this, or, you know, fix this, do that. And after my first initial anger about it, it's really, I find it a bit easier to go back through and be like, oh yeah, okay, well I could change this, and it's like building a puzzle. So then I can get into it, and I'll stop writing for that time and work on the editing process. But generally I don't have like 18 projects going at any given time, so it's not too bad.
Okay. Is that it?
If you had creative control over a movie of a year in the life of a total and complete genius, who would you pick to play Arthur?
I don't know. I've thought about this, though. I have thought long and hard about who would play which characters if it was made into a movie, and I don't think, I think it would have to be somebody that was kind of an unknown, but because I don't know any actors that are like at the 12-year-old range that would be like, yes, you right now, that's the one. So I don't know. Yeah, it's basically.
There's a consensus over here that you should get Brad Pitt to do it.
He'd be a bit old, but I feel like he'd be good as like Mr. Everett or something, right? Like one of the teachers. I like to cast the teachers as like Brad Pitt or someone else that I thought would be really good.
Brad Pitt as Arthur.
Sorry, they're casting your movie for you, so I'm going to bring them back in. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Maggie DeVries is your favorite author. Can you tell me why her book is your favorite, and do you find yourself writing in a similar way?
Maggie DeVries is my favorite mentor, but I wouldn't actually say that she was my favorite author. And I think she's a phenomenal writer. Her books are very, very different than mine are. We were actually paired up at a literary conference recently, and like her books are beautifully written, and I don't know if any of you have read Rabbit Ears, her most recent book, but the story behind Rabbit Ears is this girl who is sexually abused and ends up running away to the downtown east side in Vancouver and getting involved in like prostitution and drugs, and it's based on Maggie's own sister who did that. And then there's my book, which is like this fun little story about Arthur stealing a story. So I was like, this is the weirdest matchup of all time that we're supposed to talk about our books together. But Maggie was so helpful for giving really clear edits on my book and leading me in the direction. She was the one that said that I should maybe add a reading journal or some sort of inner voice for Arthur. She led me through the process. She got me my contract at Scholastic, and I have all the respect in the world for her. That said, I still wouldn't say she's my like favorite author to read.
Sometimes when books get submitted to editors, changes and suggestions are made. Were there any changes to a year in the life of a total genius when you first submitted it? How do you deal with making changes upon changes upon changes?
That's a great question. So there was, because of the first book, The Year in the Life of a Total and Complete Genius, was my thesis project, it had gone through editors already, like Maggie and my thesis advisor, Linda, had read it several times and had already done a lot of, there had been a lot of changes. So by the time it actually got to Scholastic, the first book, there wasn't as many changes that needed to be done. And it's kind of, like I said before, it's sort of a puzzle to figure out how to do that. As far as the next two books that were just with Scholastic, was a kind of a different story in that making those changes and seeing how things shift. There were some things that happened that would change the outcome of the ending, which was really an interesting process of, like, who is Kennedy and how does that all, her arc, her narrative arc in book 2 and book 3 look. And then because when I first signed with Scholastic, we signed for one book and then we signed for 2 more after that. So book 2 leads more into book 3 as far as the trilogy goes. There were some changes in book 3 that we really argued over. And like there was a couple of things in book 1 that were really interesting as well. Like in book 1, he does the poem, the Flanders Fields parody about the schoolyard fields and the bullies and things, and Scholastic really didn't like it. They thought that it was making fun of a poem that we shouldn't be making fun of because it's a war poem and it's Flanders Fields. Everybody knows it, and it's one of those books or those poems that you don't make fun of. And so I rewrote it, and I rewrote it, and I rewrote it, and it got like lamer and lamer and lamer every single time. But I was like, well, I don't really know if I can fight them on this, so I'll just keep seeing and keep going back to it. And eventually, right before it went into design, I got an email, and they're like, we're just going to stick with the first version. And so the original version of the Flanders Fields poem went into the Schoolyard Fields poem went into the book, rather than these sort of other versions that I had worked on. That was a bit of a strange moment, but I felt very vindicated. I was like, yeah, I knew it. I knew we should make fun of it. So, yeah.
You said on your Twitter that you're writing an Arthur 3 book. How do you make it different from the first and the second one?
The third one, I think the third one is really great. I really like it. But the way that it's different, I think, is bringing in different characters. So without giving away what happens in book 2, there are very main characters in book 2 that disappear, and that book 3 sort of plays with that relationship, and there are new characters that show up as well. And then the way that the system works in Calgary is that you've got those 3 years of junior high, grade 7, 8, and 9, which I know is not the same across Canada, but in that, I think there are different things that come up. And one of the things that I really wanted, because before I even wrote book 2, I knew what book 3 was going to be about. Book 2 was the one that I was like, I don't really know. But book 3, I always knew what I wanted to happen in that book, and I needed Arthur to be 14 in order to have that happen, because he goes up against the school administration and the principal and the vice principal in the school, and that's where the crux of the story happens, is this fight that he gets into with the principal. And I just didn't believe that a grade 7 kid who's brand new in a school would do that, or even in grade 8, he's still trying to figure himself out. But in grade 9, like, he's on his way out, he's king of the school, like, you're at the top of the food chain. And that was where I wanted to push it, was through that lens.
Okay.
You have said that a lot of things in your books are based on personal experiences. Have you ever gone through a dilemma like Arthur, where you had to choose between writing or love?
Not quite that dilemma. I think that's a good question. Hold on, I have to think about this one. Did I ever? No, I don't think I have actually. Like I mentioned before, when I was in grade 8, grade 9, I stole a story that was really famous, the Don Quixote story, and I handed it in as my own, and then I got caught, and it was the worst feeling of all time. Like, I just felt so guilty and totally like ashamed that, because I was supposed to be a really great writer, you know, like that's what all of my teachers had told me, that I was a great writer and that I was really creative, and I didn't have that story. And so I think that's more where it came from. The dilemma between Arthur having to choose between Kennedy and his story, I think just makes it a stronger book. It makes it more interesting. And one of the things that I wanted to do, that I would do in book 1, was write Arthur into these dilemmas where I didn't actually know really which way he was going to lean, and then sort of keep writing and see what came out. But as far as having to choose, no, not yet. Hopefully never. That would suck. It would be terrible.
Let's say that you were in Arthur's position and you had to choose between the supposed love of your life and winning a story contest. Which route would you go?
I don't know. I think I'd probably go with the love of my life, but you know, that's. I think that's probably the way that I would go. But maybe I'm just a romantic. Now I wouldn't. I'd be like, no way, story contest all the way.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you're writing, how do you as an author finally say that a book is complete and that you can do nothing else to it?
You can't. You can never do that. I still find mistakes in the first book, or when I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, I would have written it this way now, or yeah, like if I'm reading it out loud, I'll actually change the words as I'm reading to make it sound better. So I don't think that you're ever fully ready to give it up. But one of the nice things about having a contract is that they tell you when you're done, so you have to be done, and that is up to you to make sure that you feel confident with it. As far as like the first draft, when I feel like a first draft is ready, is when I can read through it, because I go through phases in my books where I'm writing it and like, this is great, this is awesome, and then about between the halfway and the 3/4 mark, I'm like, this is total crap, this is the worst thing that has ever been written in my whole life. And then I keep writing, and then by the end, I'm like, well, it's okay. I think it's okay, but it probably needs some help. And that's when I can send. Then that's when I'll send it to my editor. But I won't send it to her in the total crap phase.
Is that it?
Mr. Badovic, this is our last question from our room.
Yep.
You say that your move and job in Ottawa made you a grown-up and boring. What is it exactly about being a grown-up that you find boring? What are the things you do to avoid becoming that boring person you don't want to be?
Well, I quit my job in Ottawa. That's the #1 thing that I did. Because, yeah, when I was in Calgary, I had all these crazy jobs. Like, I worked as a belly dancer. I worked as a fairy princess. I drove a forklift. I dressed up as Joan of Arc and did tours of the Knight's Gallery at the Glenbow Museum. I taught landmine safety. Like, it was just weird, right? And all these crazy things. Then I moved to Ottawa, and I had the same job every day, and I would talk about Parliament, and I learned a lot there, but it was kind of boring. And I got farther and farther away from actually talking every day, and spent more time like making schedules and writing requests for money and budgets and things like that. So moving to Vancouver and being able to write and not work a 9-to-5 job, I think has really helped in that way. I also really like taking classes, so I try and learn something new every semester. So I did trapeze for a while, which was terrifying because I hate heights. And it was really terrifying. But it was great because the adrenaline high that I got from being on the trapeze was crazy. So that right now I'm taking ukulele classes, which is really old lady-ish, but I like it. It's fun. But I think there's still things that have to happen. Like there's still, I was complaining to a friend of mine today. That I was like, I have to pay my taxes today, and I have to make a will. And so I was like, is there anyone that could be a grown-up for me for the next couple of days? Like, I just don't want to do those things, but now you kind of have to. So I'll probably buy, like, I don't know, something nice. I'll buy myself something nice to make myself remember that I can do these things. So, yeah.
Okay, were there any other questions that we had from students out here that I did not? Evan?
Are you aware of what countries your book was sold in? If so, what would you say the most surprising country was? Where it sold?
Sorry?
The last part of that was, where would you like to see them sold?
So my book is sold in Canada, obviously, and it just got picked up. It's coming out in French in Canada and in France this September, which is really exciting because it's the only one that I'll be able to read other than the English version. So I'm excited to see what I sound like in French, but that's really cool. The most surprising one was Brazil, and because it's being translated into Portuguese and being sold there. It's in Australia, it's in Hong Kong and India, and Brazil, then France, and then the other two I can show you actually. I have, it's sold in the UK, so that's the cover for the UK version. It's quite different. Well, it's a little bit weird. And then it's also sold in the States, and this is the American cover. It's quite a bit different than the Canada cover, but the States is one of the biggest markets, so that's really cool. I think it would be neat to see it written like in Korean or Chinese or Japanese, just to see what it looked like in a different language, like in a non-Roman-based language. That would be cool. But I look forward to seeing what it looks like in Portuguese too.
You mentioned the size of the United States and the amount of books and the just the wealth of books that they have. How do you promote yourself, or how do you promote your book so that it stands out? Or does that belong to kind of the company that's kind of representing you?
It's a little bit of both. So I don't know how to do that. That was one of the things that I've been trying to learn over the last year and a half, is how to be an author, because I know how to write books, but I don't necessarily know how to be an author and how to get your name out there. Twitter, I think, is a big thing, but I mean, students aren't actually on Twitter as much as booksellers, so you've got to get in with the booksellers and other authors and start tweeting and but I'm not very good at it. I think you guys saw my Twitter feed. It's not super exciting. So I'm trying that. For the States, the market is it's huge. It's nice to be in the Scholastic Book Fair, because then at least people are seeing your book on a regular basis. But I don't really know. I don't know how you do it. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Okay, Miss Annette, do you have any other questions?
No, we're good. Thank you. That was awesome.
Okay, so Miss Matson, we appreciate your time. We've just been a little bit, about an hour, which is I think where we said we were going to try and cap it off at. You're incredibly insightful, and what I really like about your interview is the fact that you're really down to earth. You don't seem overly full of yourself, as in, yeah, I've read books or I've written books and you guys haven't type thing. It was really nice to talk to you. We really, really appreciate your time, and we value your insight, and I think we've all taken something away from this. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. So let's not get crazy. Do you have any final words before we let you go?
I don't think so. Thanks so much. You guys were my first Skype visit ever, so this has been like kind of cool in my end. And yeah, thanks. You got great questions. Yeah, it makes me want to go and write more, which is good. Yeah. Screw around for another couple of hours.
One of the gentlemen before we let you go wants to know how you get into landmine safety in Canada.
Yeah, that's big deal.
It was a weird job. It was at the Museum of the Regiments, and one of the programs, the school programs, was all about landmine safety and like how to make it through a landmine field, like, and what to do if you see a landmine. And I always thought it was really the weirdest thing to be teaching like grade 4 kids, to be like, so what you want to do is get down on your belly and like run, you know, like make sure that you're all the way over, because landmines are not made to kill you, they just want to blow your leg off. And it's like, it was just weird. It was weird. But yeah.
Okay, again, thank you very much for your time. We're going to let you get back to writing about Arthur and writing your new book. Just before you go, your new book you said is completely different than Arthur. Can you kind of give us a little bit of insight as to what that's about?
Yeah, so the next one, the one that I'm working on 2 right now, one that picks up a character in the 3rd Arthur book and takes her sort of grade 7 and grade 8 experiences, and it's about these 2 girls, these best friends that are in love with the same boy, so they start a club surrounding their love of him. And then the other one that's a little bit farther along that I think will probably be the next one that I finish is the story of, there's this, it's a true, well, based on this true life experience. So back in 1971, there was a guy named D.B. Cooper who skyjacked a plane in Seattle, and he's the only skyjacker who's ever gotten away and has never been caught. So this guy skyjacked a plane, got $200,000, and then jumped out of the plane and was never found. And so the book that I'm working on is the story of this kid who is pretty convinced that his grandfather is this skyjacker, but the grandfather has Alzheimer's, so he's trying to figure it out without the help of the grandfather. So yeah, that's what I'm working on.
Wonderful. Sounds great. Okay, we've taken enough of your time. I have a wealth of more questions, but I'm not going to take any more of your time. We'll let you get back to writing. Thank you very much again, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Can't wait to read more of your stuff.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great day.
Bye.